Hello, everyone, and welcome to Two Wizards and a Mic, where two really old people who've been playing D&D for a long time talk about it. And, well, actually, that's really the crux of the whole thing. I, of course, am Shane,
And I am Andrew.
and the show is brought to you by Cawood Publishing at worldofmere.com. If you haven't been there to buy everything, do it now. Please. Hello everybody. This week, Andrew, introduce what we're talking about this week because you have to talk about the coolest thing that I think has ever happened in the world of D&D ever, at least in terms of communication to its audience.
Well, I also just want to quickly point out there's a few more hours left on the Drive-Through RPG GM's Day sale, where most of our books, including some of the monster series, are on sale. Should be going for a
Very
few more
good.
hours. Yeah, it's it's pretty much their biggest sale during the year. So there's also some community news where Wizards has sent out a letter to certain influencers online, inviting them to an all-expensive paid trip to Seattle or near Seattle to meet with the Wizards Brain Trust. And they've invited people who, let's say, are pro Wizards, and it's an interesting list, and it's all expenses paid. Like I think it includes the flight, the hotel, and even extra spending money. And it's an interesting list they've invited because a number of those people and groups don't have a lot of experience in the game, don't even have necessarily a big footprint online, although our YouTube footprint is not large. Um, yeah, so an interesting move. I think the next step in a PR campaign, and yeah, we'll see where it goes.
I, I am. It doesn't. It's not lost on me that this is obviously some sort of. I don't know. I would like to say begging or requesting forgiveness, but maybe not. But I think that it is. I don't think there's very many companies that do this kind of stuff. A lot of video game companies have invited people. I don't know if they do all expenses paid trips, but there's definitely a ton of them that do have influencers or people that they know that are out in the community that are doing all kinds of stuff on their behalf, whether they like it or not. And I'm surprised that Two Wizards and a Mic is not on that list. I'm very surprised, especially Cawood Publishing. Like I'm surprised that they didn't, pick you as well. So maybe there's more letters to come. Maybe that's part of it. One would hope. I think that we should talk about some really cool tools today. I think
Yeah,
there's some
so we're
tools
going
that
to
we could
talk about
discuss.
skills overall, and then there's a really great section in the Xanathar's book. One of the few non-core books I would really recommend before their books sort of took a different direction. Xanathar's has an amazing section on tools and kits and instruments. So the first part, in general, looking at skills, um, this is another way, another element of the game, really more to do with exploration and role play, although it can be mixed in with combat. It's in Player's Handbook on page, starts on page 174. And I feel like Snape saying that. Turn to page 174.
74.
That's actually the Xanathar's part, which I'll get to
Oh,
shortly.
sorry, wrong book.
No worries, no worries. So with the general skills, these are to do with your abilities, your six abilities, and challenges. The dungeon master can choose a difficulty class, like how difficult will this task be to do, and usually, basically they go by fives. Like five is really easy, then 10 is not hard, 15 is kind of average, 20 is much harder, and then you can actually go all the way up to 30, or you could even go up higher if you want to make it really hard. Um, so you roll your d20 and you see with your ability, your ability modifier, if you can accomplish this. You can have contests where you and an opponent are basically opposing each other, like maybe trying to push through a door, and there's an orc on the other side. You could do a strength contest between the player and the orc. Um, Working together, you can do this with some things, like say somebody was searching an area for treasure or a clue or something, then one player could help that other one, and then the person gets advantage on their check. There's also a group check where I do this most often with a stealth check where the whole party decides they're going to try to be sneaky and stealth. Then you have the whole party roll, including their companions. And if half of the group or above succeed, then the whole party succeeds. And I think it's a very useful technique to use. There's also a multi-stage challenge you could have where maybe you have to jump over a boulder and then cross a log and then jump into the water and then save a drowning person, or grab onto a boat that's leaving the dock. This kind of challenge, you could have multiple difficulty classes and you could use multiple skills. It could involve multiple players. Uh, there's another thing, though, to consider about skills is that sometimes I just don't think it's really necessary, and it actually does slow down the game. Where, for example, if you have a player who has a strength of 18 or 19 or 20, and they're trying to open a door that's stuck, unless this door is reinforced heavily, if they're that strong, I wouldn't even bother with a skill check. So there's certain things that I would make sure certain instances where I would make sure what the character's abilities are, and maybe the skill check is not necessary.
Right, right.
So that, I think that's an important thing to consider. Always same with anything in the game. Like, does this actually make sense? All right. So here with skill checks in general, looking at the ability scores, strength, obviously how strong you are. So you could do a check to open a door, as I've said, to break free when you're tied up, or to hang on to something. The specific strength ability, it could be, the only one is athletics, which is a specific one. So this can be like jumping off a sheer cliff, jumping a long distance, struggling to stay afloat. So that's strength. Dexterity. Now, this one obviously is how agile you are. So, you
Right.
know, this involves different things, including stealth. So, being able to sneak and hide. And one thing to consider always is that you need somewhere to hide. I've had this a few times where players like, I'm going to do a stealth check to hide, and they're in the middle of a field. Where are you going to hide? So they need somewhere to hide. And it actually does say that in the player's handbook. So stealth is dexterity, sleight of hand, like pickpocketing, or using thieves' tools. And then acrobatics, doing something like a certain kind of jump or a certain kind of movement. So that's dexterity. Constitution, there's no specific skill involved here. It's seen as mostly a passive process, and I don't actually think that's true, because I think this is how resilient, how tough a character is, and I think that you can't. Some of that has to do with willpower and your resilience, and I think some of that is an effort. It's not just passive.
Yeah.
So I would actually do constitution checks if a player maybe was going to swim a long distance, run a long distance, drink too much alcohol. That's probably the one I use the most, ironically.
I was just gonna say that because it's
Yeah,
like I'm gonna order another, and it's like, could you make a Constitution roll, please?
yeah. I do that, I'd say almost every session or every second session, I'm having to roll constitution, because our stories with my two groups, we definitely visit the tavern a lot. Um, and then I have in our book, our between Dungeons handbook, I have a list for a carousing table, and if somebody fails their constitution check, then I send them on a carousing table, which sometimes has resulted in a character being married the next day, or woken up and they don't have any of their gold anymore, or they have a tattoo from someone on their back.
Which, by the way, if you haven't picked up a copy of Between
Mm,
Dungeons Handbook, it's on sale, just like he was talking about earlier. So,
yeah, it's a good deal right now, that's for sure. All right. That also could be, you could do a constitution check to how long a character is going to take to recover from an injury. Um, you could have a humorous one that just comes to mind right now is maybe they're sitting listening to somebody doing a talk. Because I think for myself, if I'm in a meeting longer than 15 minutes, I have to make a constitution check. And
I
some of
kind
the
of like that one.
classes that I had in university or my high
Oh
school
man.
chemistry
Oh.
class, I definitely had to make a con check to stay conscious. All right. So now intelligence. Now here we have arcana, which is dealing with your knowledge of magic and magical creatures and magical items. History, obvious. Nature, having to do with beasts and the wilderness and the weather. Religion, having to do everything to do with deities and religion, and I would include the undead and celestials in that as well. So intelligence, this one, and our notes, I've got this the wrong way around, but it is, it also includes investigation. So here's a big one that is confusing for many people. Um, Investigation and intelligence, and perception and insight and wisdom. These always get confused very often because it is a little bit confusing. So intelligence is basically um, using your mind, thinking through things and through your knowledge. And investigation is actually following clues and searching, or it could be also searching an area for something. That's investigation. It's like an active use of your mind and intelligence. Now, wisdom is something different. Wisdom is your senses, including your sixth sense. So your gut feeling and your instinct, your hunch. And wisdom includes using perception, insight, survival, animal handling, and medicine. So medicine is when you stabilize someone if you don't have another way to heal them. Animal handling is obvious. Survival, you can use a lot of interesting ways. You can use it to make sure you don't get lost, um, to make sure it could be, if you're navigating as well, you could use it. Um, Surviving in the wilderness when the party doesn't have many tools, if you're foraging for food, that kind of thing, trying to build a shelter. Okay, now insight, perception, as I said, these get confused quite a lot, and especially with investigation. So investigation is searching for clues, using, you're thinking about, where is this, and looking at things, and mostly searching and figuring out clues, and kind of like Sherlock Holmes. Now, perception is what you can see and what you can tell with your senses. So whether or not you spot something, and whether or not you can hear something. If you listen at a door, this one happens a lot in the game, especially in dungeon crawls. Or if you see or hear or smell something. And it also can, and then now insight is more your sixth sense. So insight is when you can try to figure out if you think a person is being untruthful. Now, this happens a lot in the game. It doesn't mean that you know what the truth is. It just means you get a hunch, a feeling that they're not being truthful. Something in their body language, something in their voice. You think, oh, there's something else going on here. So insight is looking into the intentions and motivations and of creatures, body language, and that kind of intuition level of senses. All right. So those are the, let's say we have strength, con, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity as well. So we have one more, which is charisma. And charisma is all about using your influence and your charm and how well you read people and get along with people. So in wisdom, or in charisma, you have deception, you have persuasion, and you have intimidation, and you have performance. So obviously, performance is very connected to bards, and maybe you perform in a tavern and you get the drinks for free, or you
Right.
perform in a bunch of, suddenly break out your loot with a bunch of goblins and charm them somehow. But the persuasion check often gets misused because it doesn't mean that you can persuade anybody to do anything or charm them to do whatever you want. It means that you can have some influence on them, and it has a lot to do with whoever you're dealing with. Okay, so your party, Shane, recently went through the Fire Giants dungeon. It
Right.
specifically says in that adventure that these people are fanatics. All the people who work for the Fire Giants and the Fire Giants themselves are fanatics. So in that case, I would make the DC like 30. I wouldn't say that somebody couldn't try to persuade somebody, but I'd make it pretty much impossible. And
Right.
so again, that comes back to those parts of the game where you have to decide, does this make sense? And this is about influence. It's not about magically charming a creature or a person.
Aw. A lot of players kind of think that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
To be honest, I had forgotten that intimidation was in there because I always thought intimidation was in within intelligence. But yeah, that's
Yeah,
kind of
people
interesting.
do forget about that one. And it's similar to persuasion, but it's basically bad cop, right? Persuasion is
Yeah.
more good cop, and intelligence is really bad cop, where you're trying to forcefully convince someone. Yeah.
Hey, Goblin, where's the wizard? Give me the goods. Settle down, settle down. We gotta talk to that guy properly.
Yeah. And
Like
you have to
Goblin would be a
consider
terrible
again
example.
who they're dealing with. Like if they're trying to, for example, intimidate or persuade a vampire, good luck. They're super
Yeah.
charismatic. It's not going to happen. Or even a noble, right? Some of those nobles or leaders are very charismatic. Um, or maybe they're dealing with an evil sorcerer. They're very charismatic as well. So you have to consider who they're dealing with, and then how fanatical is the organization. Um, Again, the average monster is not like the average monster that could understand someone trying to do that, like that could speak common, um, like a goblin or an orc. You might be able to try to get them to back down sometimes, but it has to make sense with whatever story you're involved in. All right, now the part which I love in Xanathars, which I think could help every game, especially in lower levels, or even up to 10th level, 12th level, which is what most people play. So in the Xanathar's Guide to Everything, which is such a great resource, on page 78, there's a whole section about how to use skills and tools. And I'll just go through these different types of tools. And Shane, if you want to comment on any of these, you're welcome. I'm not going to go through every part of this section, but I'll give some examples. So the first one are the alchemist supplies. So they give examples of things that you could do, and they also give DCs, like difficulty classes, of how hard these things could be to do. So with this kit, obviously, you could try to make potions and different concoctions, okay? But you could also identify a poison, identify a substance in a liquid or a substance in general. You could start a fire, and you could neutralize acid.
That's actually quite useful. I mean, the skills that you've been talking about up until now, I mean, a lot of those I think players would not know that because and you and I have talked about this a little bit before, and I think I've brought it up before, is that a lot of players, they'll create their character, they'll add their skills, they'll choose sort of what direction, what background, all these kinds of
Mm-hmm.
things they want to take their character,
Mm-hmm.
but then they'll just write down alchemist supplies
Yeah,
or whatever the kit is, disguise kit,
right.
um, which might fit with the character that they're creating, but they would not really go to that kit. I mean, sometimes, when there's, oh, we got to sneak in, and somebody goes, oh, I've got a disguise kit. So they
Mm-hmm.
could do something with that. But a lot of the time, uh, I don't think players actually consider that these other kits actually have skills to them, or sorry, skills associated that they could actually use to solve whatever the problem might be. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's true. I think some of the only reason players pick them up is because they're connected to backgrounds. Um,
yeah,
but there is more to it, and these are some great creative ideas that people have come up with to use these different kits. Brewer's supplies, you could use them to detect poison or impurities in a drink. You could identify an alcohol, kind of alcohol, or you could even use it to ignore the effects of alcohol some way. If you knew how they worked, or if you knew what kind of substance you could add to something, right?
exactly, yeah.
Um, Calligraphers supplies. So these are very fancy pens and to do with a very creative kind of writing, artistic kind of writing. So you could use this kit to identify the writer of the kind of writer that maybe wrote whatever you're looking at. You could use it to determine the writer's state of mind, possibly. You could spot a forged text, or you could forge a signature. Now, again, those are all really useful things to do in the game.
Exactly. I mean, one of the things that I like the decipher treasure map idea, where uh, I know the characters have found maps before, and usually they're pretty close by. They're pretty obvious what they are hiding or what they're marking. But wouldn't it be cool to find a map that you had to use in an adventure later on, and that somebody goes, I recognize this region. This is actually 300 miles to the west or something. We'll put that away, and then hopefully the dungeon master will be like, yeah, so where do you guys want to start? And then maybe just have that as a starting point or close to it.
Mhm.
So things like that could carry over from adventure to adventure. Um, because I don't think I've ever picked calligrapher's supplies
Yeah.
ever for any character that I've ever had.
I don't know, I've played since around 78, 79. I don't think I've ever heard of a player do it, but it's very useful. And a lot of these, like you say, you could actually use them to build the story and interesting adventures around. Carpenter's tools. So building a simple wooden structure, that's obvious. Finding the weak point, though, in a wooden wall, prying apart a door.
Those are
Um,
very useful.
Yeah,
Very useful.
cartographer's tools. So determining a map's age and origin. This goes to what you were just saying. Estimating the direction distance to a landmark, discerning if a map is a fake, fill in a missing part of a map. That one, I would say that would depend. um, Cobbler's tools, determining a shoe's age and origin. So, say you had a murder mystery and there were footprints and different footprints. Now, all of this could be useful, right?
Oh, exactly. Because, I mean, I don't think we've ever really talked about ever in any game that we've played of a character that actually has a problem where they suddenly, we talk about, oh, your armor has been damaged or
Hmm.
your shield has been cracked.
Hmm.
But I don't think anyone's ever said, yeah, your shoes fell apart.
Yeah,
Like, like
yeah,
that's never been a thing.
yeah,
But it could become a thing for a lot of games where it's like, well, I don't know. Your shoes are kind of looking a little ratty, and I don't think you're going to get over that mountain that you have to get across.
right.
So, The minutia becomes such an important part
Yeah.
of the game now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it can at times, it can be fun. Like, in a murder mystery, say you find a footprint and then you try to figure out, who did this, and then you find out it's a shoe from this kind of store, and then you find out they sold this certain kind of shoe to a noble, but they're really powerful and they're protected. And it's and then it turns out maybe it wasn't the noble, it was like it was the butler. The butler did it. He was wearing his shoes. Um, Then we have cook's utensils. So creating a typical meal, duplicating a meal, spotting poison in a food, creating a gourmet meal. I think this one, these are really useful.
I like the gourmet meal idea because wouldn't it be cool to be able to like have a session where it's like, guys, we're gonna have a break. We're gonna have all of these things that our characters are gonna eat. Boy, you got to go and collect all the things we need.
Yeah. Well, you could have a whole adventure about trying to, you know, organize maybe your job, you're all staff in a manor. I don't know why I'm going to nobles tonight, but you're all staff in a manor, and you're trying to get this dinner ready, and the adventure starts there. You actually could do quite a lot.
That's oh my god, I love that idea. Actually,
Yeah. Um,
you guys have to infiltrate and be butlers.
Yeah, maybe that'll be our next campaign. A disguise kit. So covering up injuries or distinguishing marks on you, spotting a disguised being used by somebody else. That's a good one.
That is a
Um,
very good one.
Copy a humanoid's appearance. That reminds me when my dad years ago, he worked for our bus company here, and he said one day they went to the main train station, and he said they were pointing out who the undercover cops were, the undercover security, and he said you never would have guessed.
It's kind of awesome.
Yeah. Um, Copying a humanoid's appearance, that one, I think there's certain things you could do. Maybe you could add ears to someone, fake ears that they maybe look like an elf. So I think certain things you could do.
That would be cool
Um,
to be able to suss that out.
yeah. A forgery kit, so you could mimic handwriting, duplicate a wax seal. Gaming set, you could catch somebody cheating. Maybe if you're proficient. Again, the good thing to mention is that you need to be proficient in these sets, and actually proficient in skills. Sometimes is something that people neglect, because there is a rule that you could try to use these tools or those or skills that you're not proficient in. Like, anybody could try, but what I would say
Yeah.
is, again, does it make sense? Like, for example, we're going to get to thieves tools here later. Not everybody is going to be able to. You could try, but the DC is going to be so high that it's going to be very unlikely. um, so it would have to make sense. um, Glass blowers tools, so you could determine what a glass object, you could try to determine what a glass object once held. Now, here's one
I
that a
like
lot of
that.
people do have, the herbalism kit. Now, other than
Yep.
the obvious things, you could also use it to find plants. And again, there's a theme here: identify poison. A lot of these things you can use to find poisons. Jeweler's tools, you could use this to determine a gem's history.
Because yeah, a lot of the time it's like we are told you find gems worth about blah blah blah. Um, and it would be kind of interesting to have a skill where you could actually look at them in a lot more detail and potentially find a clue, a different adventure, find some information like, oh, wait a second, this thing has a thing on it that identifies the villain we're chasing as being blah, 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 blah. He's undercover. Oh my God. That kind of thing would be kind
Yeah.
of, gives you all kinds of possibilities.
Yeah, good point. And I think here's another rule I would skip, or another option I would skip, is that you could use this to determine how much something costs. To me, I think if you did that every time you have an item that you find, I think that's kind of a waste of time. So what I do is when a player finds a gemstone or an artifact, an art object, I tell them, you think it's worth about this much. I just
Right.
think it slows the game down too much if later you're trying to figure out how much it's worth.
The
Vehicles.
the conversations we have had over how to get 75,000 copper coins back to a
Yeah,
secret lair. I mean,
yeah, yeah. Very true. Here's one that's not a kit, not tools. It's just the proficiency using vehicles. And if you have this, you
yeah,
could navigate rough terrain or waters. Maybe you could take a tight turn with a vehicle better than someone else. Leather workers' tools, you could modify a leather item's appearance. The one thing I was thinking about with this is maybe you manufacture a badge from some organization that you're trying to deal with. That would be cool.
that would be cool. Because there's been many times where we've attempted to sneak into an
Yeah,
organization or something. But yeah, how do they do it? How do you identify that? Oh, they have the thing. Oh,
yeah,
let's
yeah,
make five of
exactly.
those.
Exactly.
That's cool.
There's mason's tools. So similar to carpenter, you could find the weak point in a stone wall, which could be very useful, maybe for a jailbreak. Musical instruments. So being proficient in these, identifying a tool, a tool, identifying a tune. Um, there's lots of different things you could do with these. Navigators tools, plotting a course, discovering your position, obviously. Um, Painter supplies. I love this one. Create a painting with a hidden message inside it.
You know, there's not enough painting for characters to do in D&D. I really think
Exactly.
that I challenge you to work that into one of our adventures.
Done. Done. I am writing that down now. All right. Poisoner's kit and the tools. So here again, there's a theme. Like half of these are to look for poisons. So you could spot a poisoned object. Potter's tools, finding a weak point in a ceramic object. So insert this actually reminds me, this
Hmm?
actually is a side quest in Skyrim.
Is it really?
You as a thief with the Thieves Guild have to go and intimidate some people to get them to pay up their basically their protection money. And one way that you can intimidate this one store owner is that you break the ceramic pot in his store. That's actually the side quest. So this would be used right then. Um, Smith's tools. So a number of things you could do, but one useful thing is you could repair a damaged suit of armor. All right, here we get to tools that are used a lot. Thieves' tools.
Yeah.
So obviously picking locks and also disabling traps. You could also
Yeah.
use them to try to, um, try to open a small strong box as well.
Yeah, I think that that has been a kit that I've chosen every time I've played a rogue like character. That is the kit. That's the go-to kit. You just
Mhm.
automatically you're like, I need those.
Yeah.
Um, to pick and such thing. But all those setting traps, I never really thought about that to be honest. A lot of the
Well,
time, the characters are
disabling one.
running to get to where they need to be.
Yeah, disabling a trap.
Yeah.
And this is one I would say if they don't have proficiency, I would make it very difficult or impossible because I think this is something you really need to have the skills. You couldn't the chance that you're going to get lucky and do it is not very likely,
Right.
right? Like there's certain things like say you don't have acrobatics, the acrobatic skill, but you want to try and leap off this balcony and land on your feet. I would say that if you're not proficient in that, I would say that it's still possible. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. There's definitely going to
Um,
be things that have some, I don't know, wiggle room. Is that one way to put it?
yeah. And again, I would like maybe if the person's dexterity is 7, maybe not. But if they have like decent dexterity, but they're not proficient in acrobatics, maybe they still have a chance, right? You're saying I've
Yeah.
got a chance.
I'm gonna do it
Yeah.
right away. I could die, but I'll do it anyway because
Yeah.
there's a chance.
All right. Tinker's tools. So improvising a temporary item using scraps of different things you can find. I think that's useful. Um, Weaver's
MacGyver,
tools.
essentially.
Yeah, exactly. MacGyver. Yeah, 100%. Weaver's tools, making a special kind of outfit. And then woodcarver's tools are the last one on their list. So crafting small wooden items like figurines and even arrows during when you have some more time. Some of these would take longer, like doing that painting, which we're going to have in our story soon, um, and crafting arrows. You're not just going to be able to do that on your turn, right?
Yeah. Well, exactly. That actually kind of surprised me when I went through these earlier. I hadn't even considered that there would be wood carving weavers. I've probably read this page 5 years ago again,
Right.
but not necessarily something you check out all the time. But the fact that you have the ability to, or suggestions where you could actually say, hey, it would be really great if I could make some more arrows, or it would be really great if I could create a marker that I could leave somewhere to have either other characters, although you shouldn't split your party, but other NPCs could find it and be able to help out and stuff like that. Uh, but the weavers thing, like being able to repair something, being able to with the to like I don't know fix your cloak, for example, like little
Mhm.
minor things like that. I just love those because they just add that. I always call it the flavor of the game, but it's something that is definitely neglected by players. I don't think it's neglected by people running the game necessarily, because I think this is sort of in that realm of, don't forget, I've picked this kit, but here are the 10 things I could do, and here are 25 other things that I might be able to do if you get creative with finding ways to solve issues that you run into in a game. So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think players who are very, very creative and the ones who know how to use different kind of spells in different situations and different skills. This is another tool, no pun intended, to add to their toolbox. Um, and especially like the arrows, you think about in our games, I'm pretty stingy and I still have players allow them to track arrows and crossbow bolts, but they know that I'm listening and that I do ask when you go to resupply, are you making sure that you do? And people
yeah.
who played with me for a while know, oh, maybe I should go and check to see if I can find any of my arrows or bolts that survived combat. Because, if it's more realistic, a quiver is going to hold maximum 20 arrows. Same with a crossbow bolt case is going to hold 20 bolts. You're going to run out of them pretty quickly. Like, how are you going to carry two or three or four quivers? The crossbow bolt case is a little bit easier, um, but it to be realistic, you're really going to have to make sure that you're tracking them. And how useful would it be if you had a character in your party who could make, you know, 20 arrows on a long rest or 5 arrows on a short rest, or like it would be really useful.
Because I can only think of one player in our group that does that regularly, where they actually say to you, "I'm going to go and see what arrows I can recover," and they say, it's like, "How many did you shoot?" "Okay, I did about 7," and you're like, "Okay, well, you can recover 5 or 4," you
Yeah.
know, that kind of thing. Where I think most players could care less. It's just like, I'm going to find a shop somewhere in this dungeon later on.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, even finding caches of weapons or caches of ammunition, stuff like that,
It's
is
huge.
is another time where people do that. But being able to create your own, to me, that just seems like such a powerful skill,
Hmm.
um, especially for I don't know what class would really benefit from this kind of stuff,
From being able to have arrows, that
like a
sort of thing.
ranger.
Yeah.
Well, to be able to make them. I'm trying to think of not necessarily a ranger like character because it would be obvious they should be able to create arrows, but support characters. Things that they don't use a ranged weapon like that, but they might be. Oh, Joe, okay, hang on.
Right.
Okay, here's 20 more. That
Well,
kind of
ranged
thing.
weapons in fifth edition for a rogue are really useful because you have sneak attack still. You
Yeah,
can get it. So yeah, I would say, to have a rogue who could do that would be pretty cool. A lot of these tools too are useful in settings where, like, when you're maybe you're in a jail, or you're in a manor, like you're in a city. A lot of these are dungeons and cities, actually. Um,
yeah.
Dungeon chambers, city manors, you know, situations where you're looking for poison, or you're trying to find a weak point in an area. There's a lot of really, really useful things, I think, here that add so much to the game and to the story and role playing.
And it does make me. It kind of makes me sad that you and I have talked about skills quite a bit, but not to this level of detail for
Mhm.
the kits specifically. So it kind of makes me sad because I'm thinking back to some adventures, that it would have been really useful if we could have done X, if we had somebody who had that kit,
Mhm.
and they might have been able to, because we could have suggested it. Hey, Sarah, put that thing together, and then we could be able to, I don't know, leap over the wall without killing ourselves or whatever it might have been.
Yeah.
That kind of
Yeah,
stuff, because that it
it's interesting. It reminds me, I think that what's happened is there's been this move away from the like the tactical and technical part of the characters, um, you know, basically their actions, their technical and their tactical actions in the game, and it's moved to the role playing of their personality. And I think, that's fine to have that role playing personality edge to the game, and, the role playing between characters and NPCs and monsters. But it's fun also to include this element of technical, grounded in the world, that aspect, and tactical part of the game. Because it used to be a bigger part of the game. And yeah, I think there's a bit more ego involved now than there was before, in terms of, it's about, look at my character and look at who they are, instead of, my character can do this with these tools, or they
yeah.
can, or they're very good at stealth, or you know what I mean? There's a move away from the actual technical part, which actually is a lot of fun.
I kind of think of it as the Elder Scrolls effect, where you're a character wandering through Skyrim or wherever, in that whole setting, and if you need to create, let's say for example, I don't know, you had to repair. I'll go back to the cloak example. Like you have to repair your cloak or somebody's cloak.
Mhm.
Um, in those sorts of games, you have to go somewhere. You have to seek somebody else out. You have to go and find the source of the material, or a person to repair it, or things of that nature, where the character themselves, you have skills, you have all kinds of traits that you can utilize, but that's generally like having a bag that, oh, just a second, hang on, I got some thread, I got some needles, I could totally sew that up like right now. No, you must go to the mountaintop and find, Joe the tailor. Well, no, I seriously, I could just sew it up right now, and then problem solved. But that doesn't happen in those games, because the whole idea is they want you to explore the world and la da 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 da.
Mhm.
Where, I mean, I'm not saying that a lot of D&D players these days have had that effect going on, but I'm just thinking that that sort of mentality, like you're describing, with a little more ego about who they are rather than what they can do,
Mhm.
um, is definitely, I can see that in those games where, like you said, I'm gonna go and discover the thing, and I'm gonna break this guy's teapot just because I can, and it'll force that character to do the thing. but what if I did this? Because I have a skill to do these 5 things. Where those games have a very particular way to complete tasks, and um, so I don't know. Maybe there's some of that going on a little bit. I would think anyway. I don't know. Kind of it's. I'm stretching a little bit, but to me there's definitely something there for that kind of stuff to happen. Um, anyway, it just kind of dawned on me that maybe for a long time we've had a generation now that have had exposure to those video games and how those games are played out.
Mhm.
And D&D is not. I mean, there's elements to that, but that's not really what D&D is about. So I don't know. There's a bit more
Yeah, I
creativity, I
think
think.
sometimes people forget the options for a D&D player or dungeon master are limitless, where in a video game you just have that, menu. So, like you say, you can try and do these things instead of going to have somebody else do them. And I think
Mm.
also in the party, I've seen more groups where you end up having characters talking about something like, maybe the halfling, refuses to go to that part of town because he doesn't like it. He had bad experience there. And the party are just trying to um, go to meet with this tavern owner. That's their goal. But you're standing around talking for 15 minutes to the halfling about, oh, what happened there? Why don't you want to go there? And yes, that's an aspect of the game that you could have. But at a certain point, you also want to have more action and do more things than just stand around and talk. So I find there's a lot more talk between characters and there's less strategy and technical play, um, where I think a fun story is one that has more action and where the players are doing more things and they're rolling more dice,
Yeah.
and role playing is not a massive part of the game. Once in a while, we'll have a game like actually our last session you just did. That was mostly role playing and exploration. We only did combat for maybe 30 minutes, and but we had those sessions are rare, and it really has to. It's because of how the story is moving. Once in
Right.
a while, we're going to have a game like maybe it's very rare. So I'd say every 20 sessions, maybe every 30, we have a game where it's a session where it ends up being mostly role play. And that's because it's usually a higher level party who have lots of treasure to sell. They've got to resupply. Maybe they're buying something like a manor or a ship. Maybe they're buying a ton of hirelings. Maybe there's a lot of travel involved, but they're a high enough level that that's not a big, it's not a big obstacle. So I think once in a while that's fun. And of course, there's so many different tables.
Yeah.
Nobody
True.
should tell a table of how they should run. Um, at the same time, you can tell people about your experience about how when you do have time to use these skills and tools and abilities, it actually is fun. Um, and I find that that means that the role play is a part of the game, but not a huge part of the game.
Yeah. Totally makes sense because, I mean, that's the balance that every game table has to really find is what do the players really like? Oh, they really like the role playing side, so I'll try to give them more opportunities to do that. But I'll have to probably be attentive to poke them to kind of go. It's really great. You guys have discussed how to get through the drawbridge on that castle, but are we gonna do this or?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and as a dungeon master, again, I think the most important thing is listening, because you're probably going to have players in your groups who like different things. Like, and if
True,
I think
true.
about our regular group, um, I'd think of one person who kind of likes a balance of maybe half combat and then half everything else. And then I know one player who just likes combat, period. And then another player who's mostly combat. And then the other player I would see also is mostly combat. So you have to consider who's, you can tell if you're listening, and watching, you can tell who's enjoying the role
Yeah.
play, who's enjoying the combat, who's enjoying the exploration part. And then if you don't know that or see that, you can also ask. I mean, I survey our group once in a while just to find out basically what kind of setting and what kind of creatures you're interested in. And when I have those things, then I create a campaign based on that.
Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. Because I mean, me as a player, I like bits of everything. I
Hmm.
get a little bored when the game is very sort of linear and it's battle, 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 battle,
Hmm.
which I don't mind if you're like near the end and you're trying to get to the final goal.
Right.
But doing that over and over again kind of gets a bit boring because you're like, well, why are we doing this after a while? Like it's like, what
Right.
is my character getting out of this, and that kind of stuff. But I mean, but these skills that we've been talking about today, just that kind of juices me a little bit because it's like, well, okay, if I get bored of, I just don't want to, fight this creature, maybe I can do something a little different where I could craft something that, or set a trap or do
Hmm.
something just slightly different,
Hmm.
so that hopefully, uh, you know, I've got a rock, it's ready to go, and I can drop it on the giant's head or something, get the creature over here,
Hmm.
and have the characters, instead of just brutalizing, trying to guide the foe or something like that. Um, but yeah, just those kinds of things I like. Why did I not have this stuff committed to memory?
Well, I think it's fun too, especially like I'd say, I think it's more useful at lower levels because you don't have access to as many resources. You can't
Right.
afford as many. You haven't found as many, like as much treasure or loot or items. So I think it's really fun, I'd say, especially those first 10 or 12 levels. These skills and tools would be so useful to add another layer of resources.
Right. I like the idea, just the word resources, like being able to find, or create, like, I don't know, a musical instrument or something. Like you don't have one, but you have to make one, or you have to,
Mhm.
and the character has skills with wood or smithing. You have to repair, I don't know, or build a new. Well, if we put this rune on the side of our armor, then we could, get this benefit for whatever reason, or
Right.
however that would work. But those kinds of elements just kind of give you that sort of creative juice. But
Yeah. Well, for
I
instance, in
yeah,
our current campaign with your group, the one where you're dealing with these cultists, you know the symbols for these four different cults to do with the elements. And right now you're dealing with the water cult, it looks like. You could put that, the symbol, a leather worker could put that symbol on your clothes, or you could, or an arm, like somebody with smithing tools could put that, engrave that into armor or weapons. So yeah, I think there's lots of ways you can use these.
again, this game surprises me. I mean, delving into the supplemental stuff and going back and reviewing those kinds, the stuff in the core books. Um, there's so much there that you would have to study for eons, like yourself, and actually having that sort of, hey guys, actually, that thing you were trying to do that last session, one of you actually has the blah 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 kit. Don't forget that, because you could actually utilize that to solve the problem you were solving or trying to solve or whatever it was.
Hmm.
But that kind of stuff, just yeah, I love it. I just love it. I love D&D. You just watched an old guy break down about how cool D&D is. Congratulations. um, I closed my notes accidentally. So after all the kits and things and all these different skills, I certainly hope that people have learned something, because the part that I personally find that gets kind of lost in all of the minutia of the game is that creativity, that you could actually solve, create, do whatever you want to have fun in the game, where hopefully you're helping the party, you're helping advance the story along and stuff like that. So don't forget about the stuff that we've talked about today, because it's one of those things. It's there. It's in a book. It's a resource. You can go and get it, and it's laid out to give you that sort of add those little seeds of things that hopefully you get thinking about as an adventure progresses. Because yeah, I'm so on about this all the time now. It's so bizarre. But any final words?
Um, Again, like you said, it's useful sometimes. I mean, we've talked now about the Xanathar's book a supplement, but also it's useful, like you just mentioned, to go back to the core book, read it again once in a while. There's going to probably be some things you missed, or maybe you've started doing it a different way, and maybe the rules as written actually is better. So I think it's always useful. I find it useful to go back, look at the core books, including I go back to the first edition books, and I think there's always things you can add to the game.
I think so too. It's so important, because as many people who uh, can get into a critical mindset about any game system, not just this one. Um, I think a lot of that sort of comes from uh, they just don't remember that there is actually something within some book that is created by the game makers to say, "Hey, we've heard about this already." And there's a thing that we've put together. Might not be perfect, but at least it gives you an idea. Because at the end of the day, it's what
It's just a
just
game.
exactly. But thank you all for watching and listening. All of the important information will be downstairs, down below the video in the notes. And if you want to give us some ideas of things we should talk about, by all means, we are on Twitter. You can also contact Andrew directly and myself directly on Twitter. And we'll just we can throw stuff together and talk about things that you want to talk about, because uh, we come up with ideas all the time, Andrew especially, and but there's definitely going to be we want to build a community here, so uh, don't hesitate to get involved, or make fun of our hair or whatever, or say we don't wear enough D&D merch or something. Who knows? Anything, but D&D merch. But we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Later.